Hello. I was in my office. It was 4 o'clock on a warm June day in Washington, D.C., and the phone rang. Good afternoon, ma'am. They all call me ma'am. I just turned in my application for conscientious objection to my command, and I'm hoping you can take a look at it for me, please. So I said, sure, send it over. In a few minutes, the email arrived, and I was reading Mohammed's application. I was able to learn that Mohammed was a young father of 2 children under 5 years old. He was in the Army for 4 years. He had recently received deployment orders to Afghanistan. His parents were Palestinian, and they didn't want him to be a soldier, but just like so many young people, he had to forge his own path. He had to find his own way. But through the course of his service in the Army, the stresses of military life led him to seek comfort in his spiritual tradition. And as his understanding of his Muslim faith deepened, and in the face of deployment orders to a war zone where he actually might face the possibility of taking another human life, Mohammed's conscience told him he could no longer serve in the Army. I was able to get that from what he wrote. Everything else, though, was pretty bad. There were some real serious technical flaws. So I called him back, and I said, Mohammed, there's some real problems with your application. I understand you're a conscientious objector. I can see that. I know you're sincere. But I'm concerned about some flaws in your application. Can you talk to your command, withdraw your application, work on it for a couple of weeks with us, and then resubmit it? And when he was done listening politely and he spoke up, he said, I'm sorry, I can't do that, ma'am. My children watch what I do, and they copy me. I have to set the right example for them. Even if my application isn't perfect right now, I feel relieved that they have it. I feel relief that I turned it in. I couldn't argue with that, because when I talk with conscientious objectors, which I do every day, I hear that sense of relief expressed over and over again. Even if they haven't been discharged yet, even if no action has been taken on their cases yet, that simple act of declaring themselves conscientious objectors, that act, that proactive step of reclaiming their conscience, gives them a sense of relief. In the work that we do at the Center on Conscience and War, we're also part of the GI Rights Hotline. So in addition to talking to people who are looking to be separated from the military for reasons of conscience, I also talk to people every day who very much want to stay in. And the thing that these service members have in common is the thing that moved them to enlist in the first place. And it is the thing that is at the heart of our nature as humans. Sometimes when people find out what we do at the Center on Conscience and War, they're confused, and they can even be a little hostile. They understand conscientious objection in the context of a draft. But in a volunteer military, these are people who signed up to go. These are people who signed a contract. And now they decide that they can't kill? Didn't they know what the military was for? Didn't they know that the military fights in war? For every conscientious objector, like Mohammed, it starts with what's in front of you, with what you're facing, with what you're doing, with what you may have failed to do. But critical analysis and a bad economy tell us that people enlist to get something: money for college, a regular paycheck, health care, adventure, travel, even discipline. But talking to people every day who are in the military, I know that they also have enlisted to give something, to serve their country, to serve their community and its people. And the opinion makers, the pillars of our communities, our government, our media, our schools, and even our churches, take great pains to obscure the realities of war and military service. So no, a lot of times people really don't know what they get themselves into, and they find themselves in a crisis of conscience. And so what do these soldiers of conscience teach us? What can we learn from conscientious objection in the context of a volunteer military? Well, we can have compassion and we can be grateful for what they've done for one reason. Their application compels a discussion of the morality of war to the highest levels of the chain of command in the military. Every other discharge decision is made at the local level. The discharge decision for conscientious objectors is made at the level of the headquarters of your particular branch, the level of the Pentagon. Who else? What other ideas, certainly not ideas that question the morality of war, have that kind of access? Another reason why conscientious objection in a volunteer military is so valuable is that it teaches us about our true nature. The default position for humanity is that of conscientious objector to war. 1% of us has volunteered to join the military. The other 99% of us have said no. We have a choice, and we've made it. And we've said we'd rather not be involved in war and killing. If you add veterans to that number, it still only creeps up to 7%. And remember, some of those veterans were drafted. They didn't actually make the choice. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm very nervous. So, do you need more proof that conscientious objection is the default position for humanity? Look no further. I look at military training. Look no further than basic military training. Military training is expressly designed to circumvent the human conscience. Let's do some of the numbers. 100 years ago, in World War I, 5% of people shot to kill. 5% of people on the battlefield shot to kill. The rest pretended, or they shot away from people. World War II, 15% of people shot to kill. And that was a war that people could argue was a good war. That was a war that people could argue was just, had cause, had a real enemy. By the US war in Vietnam, 90% of people were shooting to kill. Today, the numbers could be even higher. What happened? What changed? Military training evolved to meet military goals. Military training is intensive and laser-focused, and its primary purpose is to get an otherwise healthy, psychologically healthy individual to take the life of another person, to fire by rote, to fire reflexively, without thinking and without filtering through the conscience. But the conscience always comes back. We all know this. We've all done things that have been violations of our conscience, and we feel bad, right? Consider a violation of the conscience on the level of taking another human life. Something that we know innately, instinctively, to be among, if not the worst thing that you can do. So, for some people in the military, well, military life in general is surrounded by preparing to kill, training to kill. And so the transgression of the conscience is also present every day. And for some people, that means trauma. And this is not the trauma that you're familiar with, that we talk about, that combat veterans experience, or that that we associate as PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. That's a disorder. That is characterized by things like fear for one's life, fear for one's safety, hypervigilance. That kind of trauma is shared by other people who have survived traumatic events like a rape or like a hijacking. This other kind of trauma, these wounds to the soul, are not characterized by fear for one's life. They're not characterized by that hypervigilance. They're characterized instead by an inner conflict, moral injury. Moral injury is not a disorder. Moral injury is a natural response to a very unnatural experience. So when a service member finds themselves in a crisis of conscience, too many times they feel like they have only two choices: violate your orders or violate your conscience. Violating your orders, well, that has some steep consequences to be sure, but they're finite, they're measurable, and they're manageable by most people. Maybe you'll get court-martialed, be busted down in rank, lose pay, lose benefits. Finite, measurable, manageable by most people. The violation against the conscience, we're just beginning to understand. We've just put words to it. It could be infinite. We want to let people know that there is a third choice, and that choice is conscientious objection. And we see the powerful, healing effects of conscientious objection every day. Conscientious objection can be a powerful tool for prevention and healing of moral injury. John and Andrew were angry Marines. Because, of course, we know the Marines, right? The few, the proud. My dad was a Marine. They're our noble protectors. When they kill people, they kill the bad guys. When they go to war, they follow the rules. But John and Andrew didn't see that there were any rules in war, none that made very much sense anyway. And they felt a deep sense of betrayal between what they had been promised and what they were being asked to do as Marines. The early drafts of their applications were angry but cathartic expressions of that betrayal. And as they gave voice to their suffering and their pain, they reclaimed their conscience and their humanity and their peace. And I watched that anger slip away. Jessica was an Air Force doctor for 11 years. And she was recently told that the hospital she loved in Texas was going to be replaced for her by a hospital in Afghanistan. As an officer, she was going to be leading troops in a war zone. So while she'd get to hold on to her stethoscope with one hand, she'd also have an M16 in the other. And she was horrified. She had become a healer in her 11 years in the Air Force. She wasn't a killer. And while she loved the airmen and women that she served with, the only way that she was going to continue to love herself was if she followed her conscience. And Anthony was a Navy corpsman. The Marines don't have medics, so Navy corpsmen serve with the Marines as their docs. And Anthony didn't go to a war zone as we know it. He was stationed in Okinawa, Japan, where the United States has maintained an occupying presence for 70 years. Anthony was proud of the Marines that he served with. They love each other, docs and Marines. They're great pals. He was proud of his job. He did good work. But when he would go into town in his uniform, he didn't understand. He would feel this sense of guilt and confusion and shame because the local moms would shield their children from him. So he started to look into what was going on, and he learned more about the U.S. presence in Japan and other places. And while he had so much pride in his job before, the only way that he was going to be able to feel pride in himself again was if he sought separation from the Navy. So if we are to learn from conscientious objection in a volunteer military, we have to look at these individuals and these acts of conscience in the context of their moral agency and not their political agency. Politics are complex and debatable. What is not complex and debatable is what one's individual conscience will allow. If we get hung up on the politics of conscientious objection, whether to support or oppose, we're missing the most significant point, that the power and the superiority of conscience are unparalleled. Conscience, it has been said, is the law inscribed by God on the human heart. When we follow the counsel of our conscience, we make good decisions. And when it comes to war and violence, the vast majority of us already have decided. Being a conscientious objector doesn't mean that you're part of some archaic or exclusionary club. It doesn't mean that you're a Quaker or a pacifist, setting aside politics and all other worldly pressures. Being a conscientious objector to war and violence is simply what it means to be human. Thanks.